Good evening, everyone. My name is William Lanzillo. I'm the studio coordinator of Sculpture. Welcome to our summer faculty lecture series. I want to welcome our virtual participants watching, as well as our Board of Trustees and National Council. Thank you for your support. Tonight, we will be hearing from Lindsay Yeager and Karen Kunc. Before we begin, please silence your cell phones. And I also want to acknowledge that our campus resides on the traditional ancestral territory of the Ute people who called the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond home for over 800 years. Through our mission to promote a wide range of arts, cultures, and voices, we commit to partner with and honor the indigenous ancestors and residents of this sacred land where we learn, work, and create. Our first speaker will be our own Lindsay Joerger. Fueled by a need to find closure in a deteriorating world, Wisconsin-born Lindsay Joerger paints and illustrates connections between society and nature, between human and animal, translating and reframing human contexts into fearful, raw, and feral allegories. Lindsay received a BFA in New Studio Practice and Illustration from Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design in 2021, and she went on to win 2 Society of Illustrator Awards and participate in the 2021-22 Cycle of Plume Blossom Initiative's Bridge Work Residency. Her work has been shown at VAR Gallery, Mana Contemporary, Soft Times Gallery, Museum of Wisconsin Art, and Society of Illustrators, among others. Lindsay is represented by VAR Gallery in Milwaukee. Please join me in welcoming Lindsay.
All right. Hi. I'll wait till we get the slides. How's everybody doing? Okay. Well, yeah, I'm Lindsay. I'm the coordinator for painting and printmaking. I've been at the ranch for almost 3 years now, and it has been the coolest thing I've done with my life so far. So I'll kind of talk about what I've been doing with my life over the last 5 years leading up to now. So, I'm originally from Wisconsin. I grew up in Madison. I went to school in Milwaukee. But I spent a lot of time in the Northwoods as well, so I was always surrounded by really beautiful landscapes. That's not really something that people associate with Wisconsin all the time. But if you know where to look, it's not beige everywhere. But then, oh, hello. But then I grew up also skiing, specifically in snowmass. So I've been skiing since I was 3. I've always had this really healthy respect for the mountains and the nature that lives within it. And I'll say growing up in all of the different places that I spent time, I developed this really specific and intimate bond with land and with animals. So I went to COVID school. I finished my thesis in 2021. So it was a weird, polarizing time to decide. Am I going to buck up and finish school right now? Or am I going to take a year off and hope that next year is going to be better? And I'm really glad I decided to just go to school when I did. It was a really fertile time in terms of how insane the world was. There was so much to think about and talk about as a painter. And these are some of the things. I mean, it was simultaneously insane and a huge privilege to be in school in 2020, 2021. And yeah, getting to work on huge projects at that time when, there are people who couldn't figure out how to pay their rent. There were people who were in the ICU. And I'm just in school, so pretty awesome in some ways. But yeah, a lot of what I was thinking about was I keep forgetting that I am not supposed to be flipping on my laptop and I'm flipping on the clicker. So a lot of what I was thinking about was environmental and systemic collapse, and realizing that there was nothing else important enough to me to devote that much of my labor and attention to. The craziness of the world was the biggest thing I could manage to hold on to at that time. This is a quote I've been thinking about for the last 5 years from Terence McKenna, and it's funny how not much has changed. Things have just kind of reframed themselves, but it's equally as relevant. But while I was working on my thesis, I was also still a full-time student. I was taking Northern Renaissance. It was my favorite art history class that I took. I loved the overwhelm of these compositions. I loved the non-focal aspect of them. But I also loved within Northern Renaissance art these specific characters that you find even if things initially seem very non-focal. I also love altarpieces. I love the way that they measure time. I love the ways that they're sometimes talking about the physical and the metaphysical, things that are before and after the physical. And a lot of what I was doing with my work right after that was secular takes on this. So this was the first of my 2 paintings that I made for thesis. Some of these associations that I made with the work kind of came later. The fact that it felt a lot like Hieronymus Bosch kind of came later as people were almost explaining my work to me. It was kind of fun. But I think the most important thing to me about this work was that the uncertainty of everything within the world was actually the most certain and stable thing that there was to get into at the time. And after a certain point, it was nothing could really surprise me, and none of it really went away, not even now. It's just kind of taken new forms. But yeah, this work is almost about these, I guess they're these chaotic landscapes that are meant to look like that is how they've always looked. So yeah, this was a diptych. They lived next to each other on the wall. This one was meant to be what happens after we try to reckon with these crazy world events and life has to continue to go on. And then this next work, I didn't really think about it this way until later on, a few years later, but I see all of these different things as being one body of work. Even though this huge altarpiece came later, it came as part of the residency I did after I got out of school. But yeah, this is my take on the altarpiece, the idea of past, present, future, the great beyond, who controls all. Then I had to figure out what was next. You're gonna see a lot of memes from me, so sorry. You're welcome, however you wanna see it. But yeah, a lot of what I was thinking about not long after this, and it was kind of my jumping off point to continuing to make work at that point in time, was what do I do about how emotionally exhausting it is to make work like this, how emotionally exhausting it is to just be a person at this time, as I'm sure everybody in this room can remember from that timeline. And this is something that I think, again, is important in a whole new way, seeing it going from 2020 all the way up to 2025, and the way that media spins things and the way that the world looks right now. But I guess this exhaustion of everyday life made me yearn for what life used to be. In my notes, I have that in quotation marks, used to be. A lot of it was missing when things were just mundane and nothing else. And there was that overused phrase that everybody was saying in 2021, that they're tired of living through unprecedented times. And that became, after a certain point, okay, who isn't saying that? But it was definitely a big thinking point for me. So the work became relics and memorials of a time that felt really distant in the moment, but the further away it got, now that we're 4 or 5 years out from the time that this work was made, I realized like it just felt very different from like the extremes of 2020. But really, like the systemic conditions were always what they were. They were just like reaching a culmination, and it was becoming visible, really. So this same concept took a few different forms. In the form of like a vase. Some people see it as an urn. Some people see it as like a vehicle for past storytelling. But then I have this like diptych that was all like idyllic imagery surrounded by chaos, and chaos surrounded by idyllic imagery. And that's just a different take on the same idea, really. And then another thing that I was working on at the same time was trying to get back into personal narrative. It kind of felt like selfish to take yourself back in a world where like agency was really slim or seemingly slim. And I was like allowing myself to think back to like personal, emotional things that were not so focused on the big picture, the whole world, things that everybody can exactly relate to. Because it felt like frivolous and taboo for a really long time. But I was excited to go back there. So, like, few takes on this. Yeah, value of finding yourself when like nobody's really supposed to be talking about themselves. But yeah, this was for my first museum exhibition that I was in shortly before I moved out to Colorado. So I moved to Colorado in March of 2023. So it was kind of cool to finish school, do a residency, have a museum exhibition, and then like not long after, I like didn't really have that much time to sit down and process any of it. I was here. And the change was scary, honestly, but it did feel like what I needed. So this was my studio when I first moved here. I recently moved into a different studio on campus, but yeah, it's really special. So more. So a lot of what I was thinking about with moving, just as a person, was that I was ready for change, and I was hoping that it was gonna be what I needed to feel better about my place in the world. It was so easy, especially in 2020, to just slip into like, what extreme thing do I need to do with like the contents of my life in order for it to feel like I'm more myself. But then this is like, okay, this is like a video game quote. I don't play Undertale, but this is like a quote, like, despite it all, it's still you. It's like, even if you're moving, even if you're making radical change, you are still the one who made those changes. Yeah, I was trying my best to think about approaching change with gentleness, grace to myself, giving myself time within my practice. And also, I was working with, I've always worked with really like brutal, heavy narratives, but I was like trying to backpedal a little bit when I first moved out here, and think about how do we tell stories in a way that are a little less on the nose. So yeah, I thought a lot. I went so many different directions at this point in time. I was working on a solo show, and I realized, it doesn't have to be in any one direction, and that was really freeing. But I was thinking about this idea of like the imagery of a weapon, but in like real history and real narratives, it's a tool. So this is like a mountaineering axe. little like nugget on that. I've always been interested in looking at archaeology, looking at like art history, history of design, things like that. And then, sorry, where am I in my notes? Okay. Something that I have always been trying to figure out within my work, it's been a long-standing narrative, is like this fight between domesticity and wildness. And a lot of the images that I latch onto just as like a person of the internet who's just consuming images all day are these like images of wild animals in domestic spaces. Whether it like makes sense or not, whether they were put there by a person or not, whether they were in that situation based on happenstance or not. This is like, I think like a video that's been kind of memeified. It's like a horse running along the side of a highway in Philly. There's a YouTube video too of like the cops coming and getting it. It's like, I don't know, it's kind of goofy, but in certain ways, I don't know, I love it. I'm currently working with this imagery in a new painting. And then this specific like GIF video image, it's been passed around on the internet for probably like 10 years, and I have always been interested in this idea of the way in like an image, especially one of nature, an image or a video, you know, media in general, like continues to exist far beyond the lifetime of the actual moment of the characters involved because of the internet, but at the same time, it's gaining visibility and it's degrading just through being passed along and along and along. But yeah, this is a specific like reference that I pulled pretty directly from in a painting. But yeah, this is a quote from, I almost consider it like my Bible, this like one article that I wish I wrote. It's called Notes on Feral. It's like after Notes on Camp. But it's always been, like language-wise, extremely important to my practice. But that's where it all came from in terms of making this painting, again, like trying to combine nature and the domestic, working in the unexpected, working in the cosmic, working in threats, unexpected threats, all sorts of different things. And then another thing I've been obsessed with for a very long time is like death, the fragility of time, thinking about like my age within this timeline, what might happen within my lifetime to the world, to myself. But yeah, I love these like sentimental images involving animals, but then involving pets. But I also, I mean, I think about a lot of stuff like this. The idea of like the piece of completing your life. And I also like the goofy stuff. Something that really influenced my practice for a long time was I raised moths a couple summers ago. And it was very like interesting, like feeding them like birch leaves from when they were like teeny tiny little things. They spend most of their lives as caterpillars. They cocoon up for like 4 weeks, and then when they actually hatch out as moths, they don't have mouths, they don't eat, their only job is to like reproduce and hang out. So they only like exist within their final form for a week out of like the several months of their life cycle. So I've always been interested in that as a thing of like our guardedness surrounding like self-preservation, as well as like fear of not finding your final form. So yeah, I pulled some reference straight from having these moths. Yeah. I'm going every direction. I also love the idea of anomalies within nature, the area where like mistakes and destiny and like manufactured conditions intersect or maybe don't intersect. And they create something very like unusual to behold. Think about that. I think about like mutations within flowers. I did some specific research about like mutations in plants in sites of nuclear war. Like, are the odds any higher that like mutations in plants arise in those types of environments, and like not necessarily, which was really fascinating for me to figure out. But yeah, image to inspo to reference. Sonic Hedgehog homolog is the gene that codes for extra body parts in animals. I also think about this like challenge of growing into positions in your life that you don't feel you're ready for yet. Even if you've brought them upon yourself, whether it's like your own perception that you should be bigger than you are, or someone else's perception that you should be bigger than you are. But yeah, these types of images I think about. This I always think about. Lives in my head in perpetuity. But yeah, this is a painting of my dog when she was a puppy, but I think a lot of it was like me reckoning with all different kinds of change in my life that where mentally I felt like I was 17 still. And just trying to make sense of all of it. I was challenged with the idea of talking about optimism within my work. And I definitely lean into this quote from Gary Panter. He's a cartoonist. Yeah, if you've drawn 1,000 bleeding skulls, maybe it's time to draw 1,000 bandaged skulls with a comforting hand. Because the drawing is a protest and also a wish. That's like part of the like moral code within my work, is that I don't like to paint graphic violence and gore, because in certain ways that's wishing that upon yourself, that's wishing that upon people that are like you. But yeah, I guess like that is the best thing I can probably say to describe this next painting. So yeah, this is about the idea of a growth point. Every single thing within this image is connected. All of the plants at least are connected. Yeah. In researching for this lecture, I found something that was like a very interesting connection after the fact. So St. Lucy, Catholic martyr who I would say like in a contemporary sense took on this idea of being the patron saint of knowing too much or seeing too much, and that's like feels so crazy relevant to the way that I think about the world. And then I realized that. So yeah. Otherwise, I'm gonna talk about like my last few paintings that have been made within the last year or so. One of the big themes within this work, there are a lot of like identical representations, or there are like duplicates of something. To me, that's this like reflection on my desire to be seen and also to be like mediated in things that are invisible about me. So my perspective on the world, my internal monologue that I like wouldn't ever be able to let somebody into. It's a lot of like, oh, I wish there was another one of me, exactly like me, who thinks the same thoughts at all times. So it's been a continual general idea. But also I'm kind of back to the vacuousness of time as well. So yeah, definitely like existential area within my work recently. this is my favorite painting that I've ever made for the reason that I was talking about just a second ago, with wanting to be seen, wanting to be like comforted by somebody who truly, truly gets it. And then otherwise, the like last kind of stem of works I've been working through recently, again within the last year or so, are works that focus more on like the preciousness of and quickness of time, and also reflections on change. A lot more like images of fleeting lives and things like that. Yeah, this is the last painting I've finished, like most recently. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Our next speaker is Karen Kunc. She steers Constellation Studios, which is a work site for printmaking, papermaking, and book arts in Lincoln, Nebraska. She is a professor emerita of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She received Fulbright Awards to Finland and Bangladesh and has taught and lectured worldwide. Her work is in the collections of the Beach Museum, Milwaukee Art Museum, MoMA, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and the Art Institute of Chicago. Please join me in welcoming Karen.
Thank you, everybody. And certainly am pleased to be at Anderson Ranch again. I think this might be my 13th time teaching at the ranch, over 20 years or so. So it's been wonderful to be back. I'm titling my presentation A Braided Stream, and that's an image of the Platte River, which is the river that goes across the whole length of Nebraska, and it's very twisted and full of lots of islands, but also it's the metaphor that I want to have you think about when I'm talking about all the different threads of ideas and focuses and different themes that I've used in my work all these years. And I have my presentation not in chronological order, lots of eclectic things, interesting mixes. It gives it a little more, I think, a way to talk about it and to see. Of course, I am from Nebraska. I grew up there. It's kind of embedded in my psyche and part of the identity that I have about the plains and space. And I'm there at the university. And here's an image that's kind of an iconic image of the landscape that we all understand of the Great Plains and the open space. I think that I gained a sense of place because of growing up in a family that did family vacations, camping all across the Midwest and into Colorado through our Vista Cruiser. All of us were traveling around and we always were interested in a quest. That's me at 3 years old picking up walnuts in our yard before mowing could happen. So even that idea grounds me in the space that I grew up in. I'm the second one from the right. Here we are in our Czech costumes singing songs at the festival. So the excursions, the journeys, were a quest into nature and also into anthropology and geology and looking for all these amazing things that are out there in the landscape, including the petroglyphs and digging for fossils in Wyoming, the petrified wood and the fossil fish, and that's a Mexican crazy lace agate. And so beautiful that in nature I learned there are the beautiful things that I love so much, but I try to rival that in my own work, but I don't think I can possibly do justice to what's already in nature. I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and these are kind of the imagery that was around with the psychedelic era in the 70s. I had a poster that was very much like this one of the Doors. It was the modern era. So the kinds of designs that were on naugahyde and fabric patterns and upholstery certainly influenced me. I have the Halloween costume because that was my first job in high school, silk screening Halloween costumes. It was an art job, so I was really lucky to have that. And in our home, there were these kinds of items. The Van Gogh book, I know I looked at that over and over and over again. And this Japanese print in a frame, it was probably a reproduction. And those elegant statues. The one on the upper left, I stole from the neighbor because I know it was so beautiful. Here, as an art major, I had, education like we all do. The favorite artists that I have, I think, come from the stream of Matisse, rather than the other stream that was the Duchamp and the conceptual side. I liked the visual side, the colors and the patterns that you see in these artists that have influenced me, including Carol Summers is a woodcut artist. His image was on the book cover of the textbook that we had in printmaking class. And then I had family crafting all around me. My parents did silversmithing and lapidary work, so you see some of their work there. And my husband was a glass blower. And from them, they always embodied the idea and need for making things. We always had this craft instinct to do. So it wasn't unusual for me to become an artist, and I was always encouraged to be an artist, and they knew that was part of my identity. And I do woodcut prints, so that's what we're doing in the workshop these 2 weeks. And there's two sides of the woodcut history that I have to follow, the East and the West. It's kind of a marriage of both that I think happens in my own work, that the Western woodcut method that is harsh and garish and rough and expressionistic, like you see in German expressionist prints on the left. And then the Japanese ukiyo-e woodblock prints that are so elegant and kind of timeless. Also, we think of it as always being images of the floating world, but they also did prints of war images in these beautiful woodcuts. So a thread that I want you to think about is how I work with the elements, the raw basic structures of geometry and interplay between negative and positive and light and dark. I usually begin everything with lots of doodling sketches, and the sketches really are great from talking on the telephone that are sitting on my desk. And I draw on small pieces of paper that can be intermixed. It's timeless. I can look at all these sketches, and some I've actually turned into prints. Some are horrible, but it's the way to generate ideas. And then those sketches become large drawings to scale for the paper that I'm going to use for the prints. So I'm thinking of these shapes, the bare bones of elements, as the building blocks. And if I use them enough, they end up having a meaning, like these rectangles that end up becoming a stack. Is that a stack of construction materials, discarded boxes, somebody moving? It all ends up having suggestions that I can read into it. So I think of these shapes, the basic elements, almost like an alphabet. I use them to make a rhythmic interplay, like in Verse from Macrocosmica. Those are actually like the notes from a poem or a song done in sequence. Watery Realm is referencing the water in the Nile River in Egypt. And then lately I've been playing with other kinds of arts and crafts. Since I'm retired, I don't have to be so directed. I can play with all kinds of things, including shibori with dyeing with indigo. These are papers that have been folded, and there's that whole permutations that happen with that folding and how the dye penetrates. I'm doing monoprints on top of those with blocks and stencils and hand coloring, really being free and allowing myself to play. And of course, I've had studios all over the place over many different years, church basements and garages, second bedrooms, and certainly on campus they provided faculty studios at UNL. There I am as a high school student holding a painting I was really proud of, and I'm in my ugly duckling phase, but that painting is still a touchstone about the idea of faceting negative space and playing with how those edges work against each other. It's something I still recognize in my own work. Now I've had a studio out in the country. I no longer have it. I was there in that studio about 30 years. And I have the studio in Lincoln, a Constellation Studios. I bought an old building 11 years ago and had it renovated. It's a storefront, so it kind of has that ideal of what we know every artist wants. So here we're back to a thumbnail sketch, the doodles. Often I pick things that I don't know how I'm going to do. That challenges me, and I can really find something interesting to do with some unknown aspect, something that looks hard to do. So that little drawing becomes enlarged to scale, and I often print and ink up the wood block through paper stencils to apply the color. So I'm being selective, and I allow the whole image to evolve through lots of different stages, probably 10 or 12 stages, to build up the image. I also apply the ink to the block with rollers, but here I am manipulating it with my hands also. I can blend things, and that kind of step-by-step work is kind of interesting, and I allow it to evolve. I don't know where things are going to go. On the right, you can see a stack of prints. I recently did a commission for the Cleveland Art Museum Print Club. 250 prints. That was the most I've ever done. And they were registered with tabs. That's the finished print for the club. So certainly I'm interested in the transparencies and the layers and the new mixtures of colors that happen by this evolutionary process. And I do a reduction process, so I'm carving and printing and carving and printing and destroying the block as I go. But something about printing that I think is so fascinating to me is that I can work in this rough evolutionary way. I'm very expressionistic. My carving never looks really elegant, but printing itself does something. It gives a refinement and beautiful edges, a quality of the ink that's effervescent on the paper itself. So I really am helped by the printing process. I do edition my work. I'm going through all that work. I might as well make more than one. So this is actually an exchange project that is part of the meaning of making prints, the gift of distribution, of having it go to lots of different people in an equal exchange. And I'm looking outward. I'm not really that interested in looking inward and analyzing my own psyche, but I look at the world and have had amazing experiences all these years of my career, going out to interesting places and teaching, wondering about different experiences and history. And then being a teacher, I get to share those experiences. So that still is an outward giving. Recently, I had a sabbatical in 2018, and I did research on incunabula books. Those are the books created in the 100 years after Gutenberg invented movable type printing. So these are old books, but they're beautiful and they're printed wonderfully, and I was interested in the technology of the time. So I did research at the Smithsonian Library and in the Library of Congress. And if you look at the very top, there's a little, I don't know how to make a pointer work there, right up in there. So all of these things gave me fodder for my sketchbooks. And I was looking at symbols, things about technology. A lot of the images in those books dealt with war and building, alchemy, and science. So these are some images that came from that. These are combinations of woodcut and etchings. This is the print distillation that was from that science vessels. And a thread that I've always wondered about is the what if, the tensions of waiting. These were created during the pandemic, and I never really wanted to say I made pandemic art, but how could we not think of those moments in time of waiting and the heavy thoughts? It was interesting to hear Lindsay talk about that too. So these curtains are actually taken from sketches that I've made in museums, and you see these images in the backsides of paintings and the backgrounds, and sometimes those are more intriguing to me. And of course, another thread that's important is the idea of transformations, the inevitable change that is part of life, the dangers that could happen in an instant, like these tornadoes or storms. It's really forces at work that are bigger than we are, and and we hear of these stories every day, the disasters that happen because of floods and hurricanes. This was a print I did with everyday disasters happening. There was tornadoes at home, there was oil spills in the Gulf, and a volcano was exploding somewhere. I do woodblock prints. So a thread that's important has always been to thinking of the wood itself as a medium that gives meaning. So here's a sketch of a fence that was in a national park, keeping people from falling over the edge. And then this fence is actually, I saw it in western Nebraska, using the leftovers from the milling. Really a beautiful weathered image. I kind of have often used trees as a metaphor in my work. It started off as kind of flat shapes, and then I put some shading on it and trimmed off the edges, and now it looks like a sacrificial relic. It has a ghost presence. And then I think of the prevailing winds that's making the trees make curvilinear forms, or the man-affected tree branches that are more geometric and squared off, made by pruning. And of course, all of these issues that we've heard so much about, the fires that are raging somewhere, California, Colorado, certainly Canada has been an issue this summer. We've all been affected by the hazardous air and the dangers that we're hearing about climate crises. So I'm thinking of these as very topical subjects that we can use. They come from news stories. Every day you can hear a news story about some terrible background things that are happening, and it's kind of news back here, and we're kind of safe on our own place, but somewhere something is changing. So I'm thinking of all these kind of effects, the drama of those effects, and our imagination that can run wild. Both of these prints have ladders that are the man-made structures, and then these tree branches. So another thread has been the interest in water. And obviously, you guys know about that in Colorado too, the worry about water. That's going to be the big issue in the future, I think. I've been interested in water as a topic for years and played with it, and it's kind of a natural thing that the carving marks create that effect of waves and ripples and light reflections. Here's a couple effects of water. Slow waterfall and then a flood coming and driving things with it. Now I'm stuck. It's not going. There, okay. Another sabbatical I had was spending time in Venice, Italy, at a studio where they had a giant press, and I was surrounded by water. I wanted to experience what that was like in comparison to being surrounded by land and the metaphor of distance and space that we can experience in the Great Plains. Here it was very different. I was thinking about water as molecules, the endless waves, and the reflection through the water down to the base with rocks underneath. They were really large wood blocks. It was great. I think you'll have to advance. This is one of the series of prints that I made at that residency. And there's, I showed this book to the class. What did I do? Is it battery? Yeah, probably. This has a lot of horizon lines and water bays and flowing reeds and waters in it. And I was printing front and back and adding watercolor. Thanks. And really fun experiments to use water-based materials and inks and oil-based inks combined. Whoop. No. That's not working, Karen? Nope, it didn't do it. All right, I will do it on my end. We're almost done anyway. Here's some more ideas about the creation myths. The soup of molecules and how did life start on Earth, and it's from the cosmic soup is Carl Sagan's expression. The drips, the fires, the creatures floating around and creating life itself. Okay? Here's another use of and subject of the water. And this is a series in an artist's book of different aspects, again, of the water flowing and dripping and little raindrops. This year, I went to India on a trip, and to me, one of the highlights was going to Varanasi, which is a very famous holy city. It's one of the holiest sites in the world. There's a lot of cremations that happen there. And people go down and walk down the stairs and take their dip into the Ganges River. And that was just, I didn't do that. It's terribly polluted, so we didn't do that, but we had a boat ride on the river. It's as big as it's almost like being at the beach with all these people. And then there's a nightly ceremony with the Hindu priests doing these rituals with fire and different items that they were ritualistically waving and floating around. It was pretty magical and quite a sensory overload. So now next slide is influenced by my thinking about the ceremonies in India. This print, I think, is at the maximalist stage. I sometimes try to be a minimalist. It never works. I'm a maximalist. I really identify with that. So here's some images of Constellation Studios. In Lincoln, I have a residency program. I work there, and local members join the studio. And I host exhibitions and invite artists. Interns have come from different places as well as local. It's been quite an experience and kind of my retirement project to make this center in Lincoln that didn't have it because I was always going somewhere else and enriching other communities. So I needed to enrich my own back in Lincoln. And I'm doing it again with an addition to the studio by building on. It's pretty amazing. It's going to have studios for rent and a classroom and a gallery, a small gallery and retail shop. So it's a very exciting thing. It's happening right now. They're building at home. So you would love to have you come by and see us and experience the studio. I want to build a community. It'll never rival Anderson Ranch, but it's a community that is pretty exciting to have happen. Thank you.
All right, we have time for some questions.
Hey. My question's for Lindsay. I was wondering what the recurring theme of the hair in your work symbolizes?
Sure. It's been an ongoing one for me. It's been in my work since before my work looked anything like it even does right now. So I've been using it as an image for probably like 6 or more years. And there are so many things that I like about it. The immediate one is that I love just like the classic prey trope. It's something that I use all the time in my work. But specifically rabbits, to me, they look like they're supposed to be afraid. They're always supposed to be afraid. If they're not running or they're not hiding, something is wrong. And I think to me, that's a big part within my work. Sometimes I'm working with these like landscapes or these like arrangements of things where they're almost meant to look as chaotic as they are, like they're never supposed to have a calm state. So that definitely is like a big part of it. But I obviously like love rabbit folklore, rabbits in media. I love rabbits in movies. Us is one of my favorite movies. That kind of thing. I think I'm endlessly inspired by how other people use them too. So, yeah.
I have a question for both of you. I was curious if you could both talk about your mark making style, because you both have a very distinctive way of drawing or creating images, and I'm curious about that inspiration.
Is this on? Yeah. Actually, I've thought about mark making for years and years because I've carved marks into a wood block, and there's almost like a limited vocabulary, but I want to keep inventing new marks in it. So it's a use of the tools. It's kind of a struggle to invent something new, but I like that challenge. And then I also think my mark making comes out of my body. I have a slant to things. You know, you see it in Van Gogh's work too, that he had a kind of slant in how he drew, and I think that's part of the gesture. We were talking about how our hands work today in class. I think I have an impatient hand. I don't draw slow, I draw fast and gestural and energetic, and that kind of translates into especially the energy I can put into carving a block. So then that is really interesting and unique. I'm lucky.
I'd say mark making for me talks about my personality in a really different way from what you just said. To me, it's a lot about this huge reflection on how obsessive of a person I am, how much I tend to stay on the same things, spiral on the same thoughts, and I need everything to be perfect, controlled, put into their little boxes. So I know, like, do I have a gestural hand? Do I have a tight hand? I think I have like a digital hand, computerized hand. Where there's something about that for me, and I think that's also a part of my practice, like speaking to the hyper contemporary and wanting things to almost not even look like a person made them. So there's kind of a couple of things going on there.
I have a question for Karen. I'm curious to know, you did all this traveling and working elsewhere and then came back to Constellation Studios and built that space. What did you see in all these other places that you funneled into these core aspects that define how you built Constellation, how you're thinking about community and community building, especially with this new project going forward?
Well, actually, I think I've been to so many different places that I envy. Great things are happening, lots of people are joining, lots of energy is there. Maybe I'm seeing those places in an unusual situation because a guest artist is there, a workshop is happening. But I think it's for real that lots of places that have a bigger population, a bigger art center, lots of schools with lots of young people coming out and creating the kind of art scene that they want to have. And I've always thought Nebraska is 10 years behind the times. So it takes us a while to catch up. And I also feel like I gave away my energy when I went out. You kind of have to. You're on stage, you're doing stuff. When I would come back, I had to catch up and do my own thing and have that kind of a busy life. And so did I not see it happen in my own community? I don't know why, other than they're 10 years behind the times. And I'm trying to build that at Constellation Studios. So I think there's great opportunity there yet because it's really happening slowly, but at times I actually see the ideal, which we're experiencing it here. What's the ideal? People that you want to talk to and art happening and time spent making things together. That's really what I want to encourage because I know how wonderful that is.
My question is for the both of you, kind of relating to what you were talking about with mark making and how, Lindsay, you have like a digital hand and Karen, you have more of a free-flowing hand. When do you guys find yourselves leaning into those characteristics of just like inherently how you work? And when do you find yourself trying to stray away or maybe try something different? And yeah, like when do you decide to lean into that and when do you choose to stray away?
You want to answer that? Sure.
So for me, I would say a lot of that is about my excitement within the process. Like, I don't really talk about my process that much. I don't think it's that interesting. But something about it to me is like, it always needs to be exciting for me, whatever that means. And sometimes with the extent to which I'm planning out my work and I am like methodically like sketching, doing my full color studies, sometimes I do complete line studies digitally before I end up working into a painting. It gives me exactly what I want, and that is the asset to it, I would say, that it takes away the unpredictability. But the problem with it is it takes away the unpredictability. So yeah, I don't always have the answer as to like what I need to be doing in order to bring the unpredictable back into my work in a way that feels comfortable. But what I know is I do really like breaking up my painting practice with like ink drawings that don't have a sketch underneath and things like that in order to like force trust into my little brain instead of like spending 40 hours planning and 40 hours painting. So yeah.
I think that maybe what's interesting, the way I showed the slides too, is there's no specific timeline. the work ebbs and flows, and I've had, throughout my career, forced breaks. You know, you have to travel somewhere, you have to teach for several weeks, you have interruptions that just come along. It's life interruptions. So that ends up helping me, oh, a different tangent. I think I'm going on different tangents, but overall, the body of work looks like mine. So I'm really lucky that way, is why I said that before. And I think it's been cultivated. I've worked at trying to make things look alike or have this particular standard that I have set for myself. And usually every time I start something, it looks like crap. And I think I'm a failure. And I have to start again and build up to where it's reaching the level that I know I've done before. And so I have a big backlog of stuff that I'm comparing myself to, and that puts a big burden. But I'm also at a stage where I'm allowed to experiment and do whatever I want. I don't have to turn in the annual evaluation to the university anymore. But I can't really, you know, I've played with different media, but all of it is paper-based, or the books are my sculptural form. But I'm not going to suddenly, I'm not interested in painting. So it's been an interesting pathway. The other thing that you could see is that often I do work in pairs. If I make one print, it needs a companion. So I have to make one that relates to it somehow. So there is a building of a consistency there, but then an interruption happens and I might choose another direction. Does that answer your question a bit? Yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you both, Karen and Lindsay, and thank you everyone for coming tonight.
Thank you.